Hey guys, as promised, I'm gonna try to keep it under 10 minutes. So let's start with my favorite bill in this whole docket: a bill to adopt a minimum legal drinking age of 18 years old. So just as a quick background, what you should know is that there's something called the National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984, and it punishes every state that allow a person below 21 years to purchase the publicly possessed alcohol beverages by reducing the annual federal highway appointment by 10%. Sounds awful and unconstitutional. People argue that it is, but the Supreme Court held in South Dakota v. Doyle that it is okay. We're going to come back to South Dakota v. Doyle in a little bit. Anyways, so what the bill is saying is that the new it's a minimum legal drinking age. So states can opt to have it higher, but not below it. That's going to be a little complicated in a little bit. It also says the Department of Justice will enforce this. And they will monitor the impact of this law. But this stuff doesn't matter. Like specifically though, individual states may have the ability to change their legal age to a number above 18 years, but it cannot reduce it below this minimum age. So this is definitely, I think it's beyond like the usual arguments for like is alcohol bad or whatever. There's actually like an interesting study. I'm gonna put all these links on the YouTube. But a 2014 review found that under 21 law has reduced alcohol-related traffic crashes and alcohol consumption among youths, as well as protected youths from adverse health outcomes that they might experience as adults. Alcohol and other drug dependence, adverse birth outcomes, and suicide and homicide. Whether that's true or not, who knows? More importantly, however, this is a question of states' rights and the jurisdiction of the federal government over this matter. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that the federal government can create a system of incentives and penalize states up until a certain degree on whether or not they can, or whether or not they're going to comply with like a specific federal policy. That's why I'm going to point you to New York versus the United States, one of my favorite Supreme Court cases. Where the Congress ruled that the Congress ruled basically that since Congress likewise cannot force so Justice Dakota is to take title incentives and attempt to commandeer the state governments by directly compelling them to participate in the federal regulatory program. The federal government crossed the line distinguishing encouragement from coercion. The distinction was that with respect to the take title provision, states had to choose between conforming or taking title to the waste. Since Congress could not directly force the states to legislate, Congress could not likewise force the states to take the title. And they actually addressed the Doyle case, South Dakota v. Doyle case, by saying in the case there's a minimal impact to highway fund money than it is take title, right? So there's a various the Supreme Court made a distinction that you need to basically the federal government needs to calm down. So on one hand you have South Dakota v. Doyle that says that it's okay for the federal government to regulate drinking age by providing some sort of economic incentive, and on the other you have New York versus the United States that says the federal government cannot penalize you or be harsh, basically commandeer and coerce you into doing so. It can provide just an economic incentive to do so. Here's the problem with the legislation. It does not appeal to the National Minimum Drinking Age Act. Because all it's saying, right, is that the United States will enforce the charges and work with the state legislatures. But it doesn't provide some sort of enforcement mechanism. So right off the bat, you can argue that it's unconstitutional because it's not it's basically forcing the states, under the 10th Amendment, the states have the right to regulate the drinking age. It's not providing some sort of mechanism to fulfill that under the standards laid out in South Dakota v. Doyle in New York versus United States. Here's what I would like you guys to do. I think you guys should coordinate. On one hand, you have an affirmative argument about how much kids die and stuff, and how we need to lower the drinking age. It's stupid. Studies about every other country, right? So people will give those kinds of speeches, right? The neg, I would like you to make a constitutional argument that this violates the provision on New York versus United States, because the state cannot you cannot directly commandeer or compel the states to participate in a federal regulatory program, right? And you can bring up some interesting stuff like, there's this marijuana case where the Supreme Court ruled, what was it? There was something about this. The decision. Right. Oh, yes, the dissenting opinion. Yes, it's not about Gonzalez v. Reich, right? But it's about this case, New State Ice Company versus Liebmann, where like the Louis Brandeis says federalism promotes innovation by allowing the possibility that a single courageous state may, if citizens choose, serve as a laboratory and try to novel social and experimental experiments without the risk of the country, right? So you can make the argument that we should so that's why on the AF you make the argument that under that Supreme Court case it's okay to allow the states to experiment with the drinking age either at 18 or above. So it gives like the states some flexibility, right? More importantly, you have this. If you quote NRB Jones and Laughing Steel Company, it says that interstate commerce power must be considered in the light of the dual system of government and may not exceed as to embrace a fact upon the interstate commerce and to indirect or remote to embrace them in a view of our complex society would effectively obliterate the distinction between what is national and what is local in a completely centralized government. What's more centralized by the government than setting up a drinking age, right? So your constitutional like argument against this bill, making this bill is unconstitutional, is that it violates the standards of South Dakota v. Doyle, because South Dakota v. Doyle says that there must be some sort of economic incentive for this to happen. And under NYU versus United States, you cannot commandeer the states into doing anything to comply with the federal program, which is what this bill is basically doing. And also, and you quote like NRB talking about how this is trying to centralize the government, where the government sets up the drinking age and allows this sets up the drinking age, and that's not okay. Then I want like somebody like Joe to give that speech, right? I think that would be really cool. But then on the affirmative, along with argument, along with other arguments, right? But I would address that, making like a strong point, kind of like what Suleiman and I did last year, where like I would bring up, make an entire constitutional speech. So then he would stand up, give one point that it was like all on his own and stuff, and then he would spend the rest of the time addressing and refuting my claims, right? So in refuting the claim that this bill is unconstitutional, you point out that it's like in South Dakota v. Doyle, the Supreme Court ruled that the National Minimum Drinking Age Act allows this to happen. This bill operates in the same way, so it's flat out constitutional. And you argue. Yeah, and I mean, you point out a bunch of stuff. For example, like the state, it allows the state to experiment with their own drinking age. They just cannot be below 18 years old, and that's okay under federalism. So I feel like that would be a very good so somebody can give like the entire constitutional speech on South Dakota v. Doyle, NYU v. US, NY v. US, and then under NLRB, Laughing Steel Co. Somebody stands up, quotes South Dakota v. Doyle, all the cases associated with the National Minimum Drinking Age Act. And I pulled up NYU v. US because I think it also might give you some cool cases that are referencing to kind of like make this issue a little broader. So like I would suggest like you guys look this case up. I'm going to put the link in the YouTube video. So yeah, and so regular AF, somebody stands up and gives a constitutional neg. You stand up, give an affirmative argument as to why we need a lower drinking age because kids are drinking anyway, and say now it's constitutional. Another neg argument you can make is what I was saying about the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, the fact that it lowers drinking and driving. And that's a very important thing. If you have any questions, comment them below, and I'm going to put all the links to the Supreme Court case and the Wikipedia pages that I've been referencing.